folks, we're going to make our way up to Gallows Hill. This is where 14 women and 5 men were hanged for being witches. Now, you've probably heard about witches being burned at the stake. This didn't actually happen in the colonies. That only happened in a few countries in Europe where it was considered to be a heresy against the Catholic Church to practice witchcraft, which was punishable by burning. Here in the colonies, the Puritans didn't want to do anything like the Catholics, so they made witchcraft a felony, which was punishable by hanging.
On August 19th, 1692, about half a mile away from where you are standing now, George Burroughs, thought to be the devil, was hanged at Gallows Hill with 4 others. New England's leading Puritan minister, Cotton Mather, was there, riding a white horse. When Burroughs was on the ladder to hang, wrote eyewitness Robert Califf, he made a speech for the clearing of his innocence, with such solemn and serious expressions, as were the admiration of all present. His Lord's Prayer drew tears from many, so it seemed to some spectators that it would hinder the execution. But Cotton Mather addressed himself to the people, declaring that the devil has often been transformed into an angel of light, which somewhat appeased the people, and the execution went on.
Now, after you were hanged, your body would be left there for a day as an example to the other people in the community of what happened to witches. Then you'd be cut down, taken to a shallow ditch off the side of Gallows Hill, known as a witch pit, and that's where you would be buried. This is because the Puritans considered witches too unholy for consecrated burial ground.
When George Burroughs was cut down from the tree, his body was dragged to a nearby crevice in the rocks. Then, the pit was covered lightly with dirt, like all the 19 witch-hanging victims. Witches were not allowed a proper burial. It is believed, however, that in 1701, Philip English, Salem's leading merchant, who was accused with his wife of being witches in 1692, managed to escape to New York. He returned to dig up the bones of the witches and remove them to consecrated burial ground at a nearby town. Only a few years ago, skeletons were uncovered in a neighboring town church, but quickly buried again. 3 of the victims, Rebecca Nurse, George Jacobs, and John Proctor, were also secretly removed from the pit by the family and friends shortly after being hanged.
So you're going to make your way over to these windows here. This is Cotton Mather. He was a leading Puritan leader in Salem, a graduate of Harvard, and a minister at the North Church in Boston. But Cotton Mather had some very strange hobbies.
Cotton Mather was obsessed with digging up and studying bones. During the times he led the fight to ban, punish, and then execute Quakers, he was known to have deformed babies dug from their Quaker graves so that he might study them. He believed that these were demons produced by the devil. It was also rumored that in the late 1690s, he had George Burroughs' body uncovered in the pit at Gallows Hill. He had his head cut off. Mather supposedly boiled the head and then displayed it in his Boston laboratory, showing friends how much larger Burroughs' skull was than normal, thus confirming his belief that his fellow Harvard alumni and minister of the Puritan faith was indeed the devil.
Now, Cotton Mather in there thought he was going to be the next president of Harvard, much like his father and grandfather. Unfortunately for him, after the witch hysteria, Harvard didn't want anything to do with him. So, not to be discouraged, Cotton Mather got some friends and colleagues together, went to Connecticut, and in 1703 started Yale. Yale and Harvard are still rivals today. Now over here in this window, we have Philip English. He was the richest merchant in Salem. He was also an Episcopalian, so it was only a matter of time before he and his wife Mary were accused of being witches. He's guarding the body of the High Sheriff of Salem, George Corwin.
Philip English was Salem's wealthiest citizen in the late 1600s, but he was raging mad. After he and his wife had escaped jail during the witch hysteria, the cruel Sheriff Corwin confiscated all his possessions, and when he and his wife returned to Salem in 1693, Corwin refused to return the English fortune. Philip English was not a Puritan, and he refused to obey Puritan laws or pay Puritan taxes. When Sheriff Corwin died unexpectedly of a heart attack, shortly after the witch hysteria, Philip English kidnapped his body and would not give it up to the Corwin family. He finally gave up the body for ransom, and the family buried the sheriff in the cellar of the Corwin's house, for fear Salem citizens would dig him out of a graveyard and tear his body to pieces. Many years later, the body was reburied at the Broad Street burial ground.
Well, Philip English, he took the ransom money and he built the first Episcopalian church in Salem, which is St. Peter's, and that church is still running today. And our next and last stop over here is directly behind St. Peter's, and that's the Howard Street burying ground. Now, at the time of the witch hysteria, this was not a graveyard, it was an open field by the dungeon. Now, the witch hysteria came to a rather abrupt end in 1693, 13 months after it started, and this is because one of the girls accused the governor's wife of being a witch. Well, Governor Phipps couldn't have that, so he shut down the court of Oyer and Terminar, pardoned those awaiting execution, and let those in the dungeon free, providing they could pay for their time spent there. But over the hysteria, 19 innocent people had been hanged, hundreds were jailed, and one man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death. We're going to hear a little bit more about Giles.
Tradition is long current in Salem, wrote Salem's noted author, Nathaniel Hawthorne, that at stated periods, the ghost of Giles Corey, the wizard, appeared on the spot where he had suffered as the precursor of some calamity that was impending over the community, which the apparition came to announce. Old Giles Corey was a pitiful creature, in his 80s, when he was led to the field beside the Salem jail, now the Howard Street burial ground. On September 19th, 1692, he was laid in a pit and crushed to death with stones by Sheriff Corwin and his deputies, cursing Salem and the sheriff as he died. His wife was hanged at Gallows Hill 3 days later. Nobody knows exactly where old Giles was buried, but as Hawthorne says, his ghost returns to the burial grounds at times of great calamities in Salem. He was seen many times, roaming the graveyard in early 1914, before a fire devastated the city, starting at Gallows Hill and destroying all in its path as it swept to the waterfront. Ironically, the flames leapt over the old homes of the historic district like unseen hands. Giles Corey's ghost continues to appear, as Nathaniel Hawthorne predicted, during times of great disaster and as a reminder of Salem's tragic legacy, the witch hysteria.
So you folks have any